Hello everyone, it's Simon from Higher Plane Games with 21 strategy tactics board and card games that I played demos of for Steam Next Fest February 2023. I'll give mini reviews on each of the games, what I liked, what I didn't like, and whether or not it stayed on my wishlist. And we're going to kick off with the Great War Western Front, because this was the game I found the most overwhelming because of the sheer scale of what's going on. And I was genuinely like, oh, as I was going through each of the menus. And this might be much more normalised to other people that play these grand strategy games more often than I do, but I don't. But I was intrigued enough to download the demo and have a go. I stuck purely to the tutorial because it was so overwhelming for me, but I did find it engrossing and fascinating, even if I also found the UI to be a bit fiddly, and I didn't quite know where to go sometimes to kind of pick up the next thing, even though the tutorial was telling me. So that's like a low bar. But there were some really interesting concepts. This game's broken up into different phases. So you've got the phase of preparing for battle, and this is on a hexagonal grid on the battlefield showing out the Western Front. So you're playing as the blue team, basically up against the red team, and you can either win by controlling more of the kind of overarching map, where you kind of take over different hexagonal cities and move forward and help the French, whereas you can also make a beeline for each other's capital. And if, say, Paris gets taken over, but you've still got the vast majority of the Western Front yours, it's game over for you, because that's your kind of capital and your HQ and everything that's going on. So there's kind of, you can tackle it different ways. There's an awful lot of nuance around how you set up for battle by moving in tanks and artillery and troops. And what I found interesting is that because when you're supporting the French, you've got other Europeans, then you've got Brits and Americans, and they're decided to be put into different groups. And if you mix and match different groups, there's a conflict of like intelligence. So it brings down your morale, which then means that you function less well when you get into battle. Now, I didn't really notice it because I was stuck in a tutorial because I didn't want to go too nuts, but I thought that was quite an interesting concept to play with. Once you've set up everything to then go into battle, you then actually have real turn-based strategy style control over what goes on the battlefield. And that has different phases too, because you've got the prep to build out how you want your trenches to look and feel, then where you want your infantry to kind of sit and hide, where do you want your light and heavy artillery. There was like vision balloons to try and get more intelligence of what's going on from the enemy side. And you're going back and forth turn-based, but the idea of each of the battles is that you're trying to take over different waypoints in the map. And so whoever controls the most by the end of like a 20-minute in-game summary wins that battle and then takes over ownership of that occupation, which then carries on into the overworld map. There was so much to do. I found it engrossing but overwhelming at the same time, but it's staying on my wish list because I was still engrossed. I just think the learning curve for me was really, really steep, and I was playing this at 3 a.m. in the morning because I couldn't sleep, which probably wasn't the best idea. But hopefully some of the gameplay footage, admittedly of the tutorial, can wet some people's whistle, because I think there's something really good in here. And I really like the style of this game as well, because it was mixing and matching real footage from World War I with voiceovers and all of that kind of stuff. So it gave it a kind of authenticity that gives it a little gritty edge. The next game on the list is called Capes, and this is a turn-based XCOM strategy style game, but you're playing as superheroes in a world where supervillains have taken over 20 years ago, and there's very few of you left, and you're all underground. I really, really enjoyed this game because it does something slightly different around how you move together as a team and use not just your own individual superhero powers for each character, but everything becomes much stronger if you stick together as a team, because you can then join up and have combo moves with each other. Each character, as you kind of move throughout all of the turns, has 2 actions that they can take, and then like a ability to move, and some can move farther than others, and some are kind of put into different classes. You've got one guy was heavy on defense and could be your tank because they've got more HP but less movement. Then one lady was quite like darty around everywhere, and then there was a guy that was floating around that was also wheelchair bound, who can do a lot of good ranged attacks. But what you could do is then pair up the very agile lady with the guy that's got the ranged attacks, and kind of confuse and daze them with the long ranged attack that scrambles someone's mind, and then quickly do the run behind and stab them in the back for extra damage. And it just played out really well. The characters felt quite weak individually, but together they work as a really good ensemble. And that was a nice unique spin on things with this whole kind of comic book meets PS3 era style that they've gone for. It just all came together really, really nicely, and I very much enjoyed myself. So yeah, Cape's absolutely staying on my wish list and has gone up in my estimations, because I only caught like half a trailer for me to download this, and I quite enjoyed it. Next game up is Super Auto Battlemon, and this is an auto battler roguelike with cute monsters in. What's not to love? And I found this one quite moorish, even though you are essentially playing hands off. The beauty of this one is really trying to build out your collection of battlemons as you move through this map, choosing your like randomized battles that you're going to go into. But every time you're going to make a choice of what battle you're going to choose from next, you're given percentages of the likelihood of types of enemies that you're going to battle. And this is crucial because all of your battlemons have various different like status ailments, I would say, or like pushes towards fire or ice or electricity or dark or light, that kind of stuff. But you either kind of deal out double damage or 4 times damage in that, but if you aren't proficient and really good in that, then you take double damage of what you aren't good at back at you. So it really does push for extreme builds of certain monsters of battlemons. And then you have to think of, okay, what are my party of 4 going into this battle with? And you get to kind of swap out, because you'll have about 6 or 7 other battlemons as you kind of go through the levels to kind of swap in and out of, which I thought was quite cool. So it gives you plenty of opportunity. The main problem that I kind of had with this was towards the end of a run, I'd always find that my monsters had not leveled up nearly as quickly as the AI had. So I was sitting there thinking, I don't really know how I can ever beat this final boss. So that's probably me not being great at roguelikes and these kind of Battlemon, Pokemon style auto battler games. But I really enjoyed the aesthetic. It played really well. I liked the variety that I did a couple of runs on this, and they all felt quite different because of my choices and what was given to me to like manage and play with. So yeah, this one's staying on my wish list, and I very much enjoyed this one too. This next game is a genuinely unique spin on kind of political diplomacy style games, because it's a 25 player game where you've got one person that buys the game and is trying to control the kingdom and playing their own story. But then you can have up to 24 people playing online, split up into 3 different factions that are trying to undermine that single 25th player and try and whip away and bring down the kingdom to meet their own goal themselves. And how this plays out, and bearing in mind I was playing as like all 4 players, because you have to have 4 players ready to play this game for King of the Castle to work. Once the main player sets up to be like this person who needs to find a spouse and get married and do good diplomacy and work towards a specific goal of being uncontested for the throne of the kingdom, you then have the 3 factions that you've chosen to bring into this game choose how they're going to bring you down. So it could be that they're going to bleed your coffers dry so you've got no money. It could be that they're going to cause as much political anxiety and chaos as possible that you don't have any reign. It could be that they're going to bring down all of faith and religion around you, or it could be that they're going to ruin all the farms and crops so that you've got no sustenance, and that causes an uprising in a different way. And so, depending on what they've chosen, then means that when you come to each scenario through what the game calls seasons, but it's like turns of events, that person will trigger off a story, and then depending on what they've chosen, they're trying to work towards their end goal, whilst the other three factions are trying to vote for bringing down like the establishment in other ways. So it requires you to all kind of work not together, but together in your own factions. So if there's 24 of you, you'll have 8 in each of those 3 factions voting and spending money and allocating resources. And you have to make sure that you're all kind of playing ball and aiming for the same thing. Where I think this game might struggle slightly, because every action has a reaction, is that if everyone plays the game perfectly, you end up not in a stalemate, but in a weird kind of whoever's had the easiest, lowest hanging fruit to win wins, is how I was seeing this game starting to play out. But the demo only gives you like the first 5 terms and then kind of goes, ta-da, that's it. So I don't know if I can truly comment on all of that, but that's how it felt like it was going. But it was a genuinely unique and interesting experience that I think has absolute legs and will be a shining beacon of individuality in 2023 when it releases. The next game up is called Lakeburg Legacies, and I really enjoyed this one. I also didn't know if this would almost become a city builder game as well, because it really straddles the line between what a city builder and a resource management game does versus being a strategy game, but I've put it here instead. In this game, what you're doing is building up the town of Lakeburg by building like lumberjack huts and bakeries and so on and so forth, so that you can build up resources that are running at the top of your screen. But in order to do that, you need to build houses and build and manage romances and families and incentivize and keep bringing the love to the town of Lakeburg. And you do this via mystical Tinder. So you have these characters come along from neighbours that you can kind of buy and say, come to my village. And then what you do is you then place them in like a weird Tinder Mystic Meg environment. And then you get matched with other people, and they'll have personality traits. They'll have likes and dislikes, and it will kind of tell you whether or not these two people are compatible or not. And then what you'll do is then take them on dates, and so long as they kind of pass the date and they're kind of liking each other, you can then decide whether they're going to marry or not. And if they marry, that other partner then comes and joins Lakeburg. You put them in their house, and then providing they're in a healthy, happy relationship, and that's very much dependent on whether or not you matched them together or not, they will then spawn offspring, which then means that Lakeburg gets bigger. And then what you'll be doing, because you're placing everyone into work in all of the different environments to build all the resources to keep Lakeburg going, you can then place the children in as apprentices, because people will die. And so what you're trying to do is keep that legacy going for Lakeburg and then start to build up layers of class. Now, the demo doesn't go into like that ridiculous level of detail. It keeps you very much on the opening kind of generations of what's taking place. But I love the fact that I kept on matching up men together that then miraculously were having babies. They were then like keeping them as apprentices in the bakery, and then like you was able to start pulling together like different couples' offspring and being like, hey, intermingling of Lakeburg. Again, really, really enjoyable. A slow burn, but oddly addictive, because what you could then do is click into each couple's house and it gives you a running commentary of how their relationship in life is going. So it's things like, so-and-so brought mud into the house, -5 relationship points. And I was like, we've all been there. And I just really like the tone of this game. Great fun. 2 thumbs up. Very much staying on my wish list and is probably a day one. The next game up is called Overboss, and this is a board game strategy that's single player or online competitive, but no local multiplayer, which I found a bit odd unless it's going to be added to the full game. But the idea behind this is that you get given a grid of like 4x4 squares or 4x3 squares in a grid, and you have a selection of tiles of different types of terrain or areas like castles or volcanoes or graveyards, and then each one comes with a randomized demon, and that could be a wizard, it could be like a giant berserker type thing, and each of these terrains and like overlords or overbosses have different traits and score points depending on where you put them on the map. So it could be that if you have like 3 graveyards in like a certain area, or forests, and they're on like the edge of your 4x4 grid, they score more points than if they're like put in the centre. There's also like, depending on how you put things like opposite each other, that might cause points to go up or multiply as well. And then when you place in the different demons, depending on how you match the demon with the terrain, that might score points. But then also the different types of demons you put in score more if you're more diverse. So you're always trying to play off what's the strength and weakness of placing something in each places. You can also pick your Overboss, which then gives a special move, which can add on additional points, or kind of cleanse a board and cleanse a mistake should you need to. And you can also add in portals, which allow you to kind of mix and match where some of these like boss monsters can go, so that you can also correct and zhuzh around some mistakes later on in the game. I quite enjoyed this game, but it's quite RNG heavy, and so I didn't necessarily feel like sometimes a good run was always capable for me or possible for me, and then other times I was like being stupid but still scoring more. So yeah, interesting, good for a quick 10-minute game, but not going to be something that I think the online competitive scene is going to go absolutely nuts for. It's staying on my wish list. It'll probably be one that I'll grab on like a heavy sale, but I quite like the idea and concept behind it. The next game up is called Card Crawl Adventure, and this is a deck builder style roguelike game that reminds me a little bit of Hands of Fate, but not as good or as engrossing. The idea behind this is that you've got 9 cards in a grid, and you kind of move in a continuous line to connect at least 6 of them together per turn, but you can go further if you want and do all 9. And depending on how you scoop up the cards will then depend on whether you're causing damage to enemies or getting given more damage to yourself, or whether you're replenishing your own HP or your own damage or your own shield or something like that, depending on the types of cards that you get. What this then means later on down the path is that depending on different missions and different things that you do as you clear out groups of 9 cards constantly over and over again, is that you then trigger more powerful cards to come in, both from attacks and like effects for you, but also bosses for yourself, so that you can build out a more impressive deck to beat out better enemies. This game was relatively simple to pick up, but I think I was missing some of the nuances in how like cards had area of effects on each other and things like that. It didn't feel random, but I wasn't quite clued up and understanding what sometimes hitting a card in one way would cause an effect when it didn't necessarily match what was read on the card. So I got a bit confused with this, but I did like the general overall art style and theming. and the vibe of it, because it's all like taking place in a pub and you can like hear the background noise of like rowdy folk pubs and all of that kind of stuff. So plenty to like, I think, for other people. It stayed on my wish list for now, but it's going to be a bit of a weak recommendation for me, because all I kept doing as I was looking at this was going, I really prefer Hands of Fate. And it isn't a direct comparison either, so I don't know why I got that stuck in my head. The next game is a pure board game called Shong, and it's a marriage of the word short and long. And this is a bit like chess if chess pieces had two move sets, and every time you moved a piece it flipped from one move set to another. And it moves from a short move to a long move. And it sounds odd and silly, but it gets very addictive and very strategic and very clever very quickly. And for such a small, tiny game, I quite enjoyed it. So, like, your version of a rook, for example, in chess, where you move diagonally, its short version, its first move, might only move one square, but its long version would move 2 or 3. I can't remember what it actually was. You'll see on the gameplay footage. But it can only move if it's got a direct line of sight to where it's going. So what you're doing is moving your pieces to block that piece then doing a big move, because those big moves, where it's moving several squares, means that something that feels quite far away is actually in danger of being taken out and removed from the board. You win in Shong by removing everyone else's pieces and putting your kind of king in check, just like normal chess. But you can also win by getting your king to the other side of the board. And so as pieces get very quickly removed from the game, you might be able to make a run for it and block pieces with what you've got remaining, so that they can't then move out very well, because the line of sight for the long move just isn't possible. So highly strategic, but very quick and simple games to get done and dusted. Just have to get your head round the whole short and long Shong. The next game up is called OscarWildeCard, and that definitely gets the winning title of a game in this video, because that did make me laugh, and that's essentially why I downloaded the demo. This is a 2-player card game that I thought, oh, it might go a bit Cafe International, and then it doesn't. But it's kind of inspired because it's all sat around a dinner table. Essentially, this is lots of really catty gay people wanting to get around a table and have a dance party or like a dinner party and outsmart each other by being like more toxic than the other side. Genuine true story. Don't at me. You've got 5 seats and then like a head of the table for each of the 2 players. And what you're doing is placing down your cards, and each one has like a score of love for who they're sitting next to. And the idea is who can get to 12 points of affection kind of wins the game. But the arrows on the card for like going left, right or pausing depends on where their affection is going. So you need to kind of strategically place down your cards so that they're kind of intermingling with each other. But you also have to watch out about who's sitting directly opposite you, because each card also has like a cause and effect. And so a bit like scissors, paper, stone, they've got like muscles outdo beauty, outdo brains, outdo muscles. And so you're trying to like work out who can trump who, because if you're kind of stunned out of affection because your eye's been taken over by the people sitting opposite you, you're not going to get the attraction from the person sitting next to you. I struggled to get some of the advanced nuance of this game. It's a me problem, probably more than the game. But as a result, I found that games kind of went on and on and on, with us always sitting around 10 and 11 points and never quite getting to 12. And so it felt a bit draggy and annoying. And so this one's not staying on my wish list for me personally, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad game. A game that I really struggled with, though, is called Takara Cards. And this takes deck building and a game very similar to Card Crawl Adventure that I talked about earlier on, but puts it in like a space ship asteroid style setting where you're moving around your ship dependent on the cards that you play and the moves that you move around on. So it could be that you're trying to shoot various different ships that are coming towards you. It could be that you're picking up scrap debris so that you can then sell it and get better cards. It could be that you're trying to move through various asteroid fields. But what happens is that at the end of like your 3 moves, because you're moving through space, there's like a cascade of cards coming down that you're moving through. And if you don't clear enough cards of the same variety, they start combining and merging together. So what previously might have been like a I'll cause you 1 damage then becomes 2. And then as you get further into the game, that 2 then scrapes up another 1 and becomes a 3. But then it's starting to like amalgamate its status ailment effects as well. So the longer the card stays on the board, the more powerful it gets and the more overwhelming the game becomes, because your ship doesn't really get better, and so you're just getting hugely overwhelmed. I did not gel with this game at all. I think the theming felt a bit dull for me, but also I was struggling with some of the moves weren't necessarily triggering for me properly, and the controls were really rubbery. And so I would go to put down what I thought was one move and it would select a different card for me and hand it out. And I was getting really annoyed. And so my time on this was quite short and limited because I got really frustrated and I uninstalled it and it's off my wish list. But Takara Cards might be for you. The next 3 games on my list are tower defense games, and they're all staying on my wish list, but for very different reasons, because they all tackle the genre in a different way. Gods of Defense is first up, and I'm just going to say it's Uncanny Valley Rogue Tower. But there are some interesting perks, and it started to develop its own personality a bit more the longer I played it. This game, if you've never played Rogue Tower before, is a tower defense game that after every wave of enemies that you defeat, you then add on where you want, like a randomly procedurally generated addition to your path. Now, this will then spread out into multiple different paths and routes, and then you kind of get to choose how and when things kind of get added. And then it's procedural generation, and then you're just dealing with the waves of stuff as they come through. So far, so very Rogue Tower. The interesting thing here is that what it's trying to do is add on an additional layer of strategy by making enemies come through cursed. And so what they do is they start corrupting your towers and essentially muting them or slowing them down or causing them problems. And the way how you combat this is by keeping your towers furthest away from the path as possible so that they don't get corrupted as the corrupt enemies go past. And so with the upgrades, you can upgrade the power and damage that you get, the speed and the critical damage, but really, like, more crucial than anything else is the range of the tower. And that was just an interesting emphasis to push in a tower defense game, because I'd never thought of trying to place my tower as far away from a path as possible and then spamming my upgrades for for ranges so that I could then push it out as wide as it could be. The other thing that I found interesting with Gods of Defense is that whenever you hit a specific wave in the run, instead of the end portals where the monsters come through to spawn a boss or something like that, one of them starts running towards your tower while still spewing out enemies. And so you've got to kill the kind of eye of the portal before it causes you so much problems that it overwhelms your tower and kills you. So I thought that was a nice touch as well. So yeah, Gods of Defense, it is in need of a bit of its own personal identity, but I was enjoying it. A game that certainly did have its own identity was Engineered to Purpose. And this is a hugely dark tower defense game. You're playing as this like half AI, half human that's being harvested organs for tower defense games. And your mother and your sister and your brother are like these sentient robots who are like, oh, we've just chopped out your shame and made it into a laser tower. Ha 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 ha. I was like, Jesus Christ, this is an existential crisis. But the other really cool thing about this game is the clues in the title. You custom build your towers, and I think this is ingenious. So you start off with like a base of like, are you going for bullets, bombs, lasers, that kind of stuff? But then you can put on like a different type of AI that runs it, and that allows you to focus on different types of enemies. But then you can also put on what's called capacitors. And so this allows you to start adding on like a poison version or an ice and slow version. And as you go through the different levels, you unlock more parts to then start custom building all of your different towers. What then makes it even more nuanced is that before you kind of complete your tower, it gives you a certain amount of attribute points that you then allocate to, do you know what, I'm going to have a really weak bomber, but I'm going to spend all of my points on making it fast so that it's constantly throwing out smaller bombs. But then that really helps because they're going to do blast radius on loads of tiny small things rather than making one big blast every couple of seconds. And so being able to have all of that customization meant that I felt more in charge of my towers in this game probably than almost any other tower of defense game I've ever played. And that was really moreish and addictive. And so whilst it might not look like much when you're actually in the battlefield itself, this was a joy to play and is absolutely staying on my wish list. The third tower defense game is called Ghostboy, and this is probably the most unique and weirdest one because it's a tower defense game that's not taking place in paths and lanes. Instead, it's taking place in someone's like death sphere imagination. You've essentially died, and what you're doing for tower defense is stopping people's emotions and negativity and depression getting to their mind and affecting their mental state. And so what you're doing is arranging towers that will fire out whilst you place walls to try and brigade people in, like the enemies in, whilst controlling a gardener that can fly around and grab these like little cute / creepy dolls that can maintain the towers and make sure that they're constantly supplied with ammo. So it felt like an RTS crossed with a tower defense game, and almost like a 2D version of Pixel Junk Monsters, but all about the after death, like the afterlife, after death and depression. Really unique. I'm not sure everything was quite landing, but I was so intrigued by the whole premise, it's staying on my wish list just for that really, and I look forward to diving into it again when it gets released at a later point. One game I won't be touching with a barge pole though is Flight Level, and this is very much down to personal preference rather than me saying that this is a bad game. Flight Level is probably the most realistic, slimlined and streamlined down to like real bare bones flight traffic control tower simulator. But instead of adding on loads of bells and whistles that you normally get in other games, this game gives you a pure screen with all of the data on, just like reality. And so it's so close to reality, and you're having to give out like coordinates on degrees and telling people whether or not they're going to descend or ascend at certain like feet per minute and all of that kind of stuff. There was so much information, but laid out exactly how it's laid out in the real world, and I really didn't like the UI at all. But because it's trying to emulate so close to reality what it's doing, it's taken on all of the retro horrificness that we just don't have in modern day user interfaces anymore. So I was finding the game exceptionally difficult, very glaring and heavy on the eyes because it's just like giant blue screens, and it's just very minimalistic, because you're just watching beeps going across a screen. And if you are heavily in love with flight traffic control simulators, you will love this, I'm sure of it. But I think I came away from this game realising that this genre is not for me. The other thing I'd say about Flight Level, which also kind of compounded the issue for me, is I ran into so many control issues with this, with clicking on things and it wasn't being recognised. Something that it would say, yes, I'm going to do it. It would then become non-responsive and I couldn't get hold of that flight afterwards. And so I was never really sure if it was me being at fault or the game being at fault, because it was really hit and miss as to whether it would ever pick up any of my actions. So I got frustrated, I uninstalled it, and then kind of had to turn off the computer screen because it was just too blue. The next game up is called Howl. And Howl is a turn-based strategy game that is like a real life, like Japanese art painting come to life, but not like an ukiyo one. The idea behind this is that you are trying to be a prophecy coming to life, and each level that you have has multiple goals and they can't often be completed in the same run through. So you're going to have to play this game twice if you want to get everything, basically. You'll want to reach an end point within a certain amount of turns, because as you kind of walk before you, a scroll unravels that you then can walk on with the turns and the spaces that you can go around on the grid. But then depending on the level, you'll have different wolves that are chasing you around or other different enemies. And what you'll be doing is banishing them back with light that is then replenishable moves, or trying to bow and arrow and kill them like an archer. Or you can try and stun them and then run away if you're right next to the exit. There's a variety of different moves and they're all upgradable as you kind of move through the game itself, and more are going to become available as you go through the game. I really like the art style of this. I quite liked just the general mood and tone of it, even though it wasn't necessarily doing anything remarkably new or fascinating. This is one of those where the mood of it kind of made it stand out more than the gameplay itself. But I still enjoyed myself and it's staying on my wish list. The next game up is called Spirit Interlude, and it's a simultaneous strategy game. It's not quite real-time strategy or turn-based, because you move and play together. But how you draft in your baby spirits to do your dirty deeds for you is fundamental to how this game plays out. You have a giant spirit that you're protecting. You're trying to kill the opposing spirit. Whoever's HP drops to 0 first loses and the other person wins. But you have an army of baby spirits that you'll draft in every turn, 3 of them potentially, so that you can then build up an army. But they have 2 different areas that they can sit in. Whilst they're charging for an attack, they'll stay in a defensive slot, and they'll put themselves in harm's way so that your big overarching spirit doesn't get hurt. But when they're ready to attack, they'll glow for the next round, and then they'll move from the defensive part to the offensive part of the map. And then what they'll do is it becomes like an auto-battler, where you battle the babies of the person that you're trying to kill, whilst their ones that are ready to attack will attack your ones that are still charging up, therefore being the defenders. So they're constantly kind of switching back and forth. And so what you're looking for is to have some kind of synergy in having lots of them attack all together, or being enough to overwhelm what's there in the defensive side of your opponent. Because once you've killed all of the ones that are in defence, if you've still got some ghosts left, they basically do a charge attack and take off 10 HP from the boss that you're trying to kill. And it's whoever gets that amount through wins, basically. Now, the key with all of this is that you can level up your baby spirits by having 3 of the same in your kind of collective. And you've got 7 slots to begin with, but you'll start to increase it as you go through the game. And so that becomes highly tactical, because you'll want to have more powerful, more leveled up spirits. But to do so, that means that you can't fill up all of your slots, so you're never quite running at full capacity. I've quite enjoyed this. It was simple to pick up and easy to understand, but quite Moorish, and really like you had to choose your moment to pounce really effectively, and that kept me coming back for more. I would say exactly the same thing for a game called March. This game is a simultaneous strategy game too, where instead of it being like in battle areas, you're in lanes like Plants vs Zombies. And so what you're doing is having an army that is constantly trying to charge to the other side. This is like aggressive war bulldog to me. And you have different troops that have different traits. Some are archers, so they might be able to trigger additional attacks. Some might have more HP, some might be able to swap around and have other like unlockable attacks. And these different types of army troops that you have are all upgradable as you move through like an overarching roguelike map. And so more troops become unlockable as you move through too. But what was crucial is that essentially what you're doing is it gives you a selection of troops that you're going to bring onto the battlefield, and the same for your opponent. And so what you're doing is working out where the weaknesses in your troops just constantly running into battle, smashing into your opponent, because what will happen is that they'll attack each other at the same time, quite often kill each other, and then that leaves potentially a gap in the lanes. And what's the overarching way to win is to get as many of your people across to the other side of the playing field, just like British Bulldog. But obviously they're doing the same to you. So you need to make sure that you cover up the gaps whilst also working out how you can break through. And as more and more different types of troops become available, the strategy behind that becomes more complex. I found this game quite Moorish. I did run into not some difficulty spikes, but I found that as soon as the witch came into play, I was struggling to win very often. So I was clearly not kind of getting the best tactics out there to beat that character. But again, Moorish, simple to understand, but loads of tactics underneath that kept me coming back for more, and again, staying on my wish list. Nearly at the end now. We are at Spirited Thief, and this is a stealth strategy game. So it's top-down 2D-ish, and you have like a couple of different characters that you control. One is a ghost that can kind of go through walls trying to map out and find a way to get through various different heists of stealing treasure and various different things that you're after for the main character that you control, who then has to sneak around because they're very, very killable. And spottable. And so what you're doing with the ghost is kind of sussing out what you can do to get around the different levels and complete the heist, but then you need to get the real human being mage through. Now there's a variety of different attacks that you can do to stun enemies, but what I really liked about this is that there's loads of magic doors or magic alarms, and so as you progressively go through the level, you're raising alarms and therefore raising the threat, because what happens is that as soon as you've done a certain amount of moves or triggered an alarm, you move to the next level of alert across the level, and that wakes up more guards, which means that there's more things in your way to try and spot you and stop you from completing your heist. And what you always have to do is go in, get the goods and get back out again. But as the levels get bigger and bigger, the more moves you have, the higher the level of threat, the more things get thrown at you. Now, I really enjoyed this game, even though it doesn't look much to see on the screen. It was built in a way that meant that I had to really think on my feet a few times to know what was the right move to get me out of a certain situation. But I also like the fact that sometimes you have to just walk into an unknown environment and think on your feet and hope that you've got it right. But thankfully there was a rewind button that you could use 3 times per level, so that you could then kind of back yourself out of a situation if you made a silly error. So yeah, quite enjoyed this one. I think some people might find it maybe a little bit simplistic if you are really big into stealth games, but I'm not. I found it enjoyable. Now, this next game, I don't actually know what it's called because it was in Chinese, and the entire thing was Chinese. There's no English language in this demo whatsoever, and I struggled to get very far in it because of that. But it was a mixture of turn-based strategy, but set in like a Asian horror movie. So there was a collection of people that you were able to control, all seemingly trying to avoid all of the Asian horror movies combining together with some kind of alien zombie attack. But it had a really good atmosphere. I really liked how it was using cards as well to trigger attacks and things like that too, rather than it being like purely percentage or probability based. So it was mixing and matching loads of different ideas all together, but it started to get too complicated for me to understand what was going on without having the English language there. But definitely a vibe. Looks really quite interesting. So yeah, if you can speak simplified or traditional Chinese, grab it and stick it on your wish list. It looked like quite a corker. The last two games that I wanted to talk about were demos that I just couldn't get running properly. They were Creeping Deck Pharaohs Curse, which sadly, as I could see other people reporting it on the Steam forums after I played the demo as well, it was a roguelike deck builder that sadly the end turn button didn't work. So that lasted all of 2 minutes. And then the final game was called Little Learning Machines. And the idea with this was that it was supposed to be a game that allows you to train machines slightly in idle format, but also just by like giving them little mini programs and tasks to do to repeat and learn on. Sadly, this game for me got stuck in the loading screens, but I also didn't appreciate the fact that it was downloading other programs to run an AI idly in the background in that main menu screen. And I feel like it needs to be much more transparent about how it does that kind of stuff in the future, because I was sitting there thinking, what's it doing? And then I thought, oh no, have I downloaded a virus? I've not, but yeah, the fact that it took 5 minutes to just download all of this in the background and then never ever loaded just made me go, well, that was a waste of time. So I don't recommend that demo to anyone either. So that's it. 21 strategy, tactic and card games that I've ran through. I'm sorry that video's gone on much longer than I expected or thought, but hopefully that was informative and enjoyable for someone, and you got some new potential things to stick on your wish list. Couple more videos for Steam Next Fest February 23 to come. Hopefully, you guys take care. And if you like this video and you found it enjoyable, please do give it a thumbs up, because YouTube just does not know what to do with me and doesn't recommend me to anyone. So cheers. Bye. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane-network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.